Welcome to the 19th Annual National Book Festival, brought to you by the Library of Congress. Not only has this festival been amazing, but it is absolutely free of charge for everyone. Is that not amazing? And it is in part thanks to the generosity of donors large and small. So if you'd like to make a donation to help things like this happen, amazing events, please do so on our festival app under the word donate on the app's homepage. We appreciate your support, and we love to bring great events like this to you. We hope that you've had an amazing day, and this day has inspired you to not only visit the Library of Congress, but also utilize your local libraries as well. You can visit, yeah, absolutely. Yay for libraries. You can visit us in person on Capitol Hill, or you can go to our website at loc.gov. We are thrilled to announce the library's brand new National Book Festival Presents series. This is a series which will extend the reach of this festival with more exciting book events at the library starting next month. So please check loc.gov for updates on all the programs for children as well as for adults and the ticketing options for each one. We welcome your questions. They are so wonderful at the end of this presentation. But if you have a particular question for the author, we ask if you could please keep it brief and to the point. You are then giving us permission to use it on our webcast. And finally, I ask that you either turn off your cell phone or put it on silent so we can enjoy the presentation in its fullest. So without further ado, I absolutely want to thank you for coming. Enjoy the rest of your afternoon, and welcome to our presentation.
Good evening. My name is Alberto Manguel, and I'm here to get these two fabulous writers to talk to us. They are in the far left of me, Madeline Miller, who is the author of the Song of Achilles that won the Orange Prize for Fiction, an extraordinary novel. And now she has come back to the ancient world, the world of Homer, with a superb novel called Circe. Emily Wilson. Emily Wilson is the classics professor at the University of Pennsylvania, and she is a specialist in the world of Rome and Greece. She has written two astonishing biographies, or rather explorations, of two very ambiguous characters of the past, Socrates and Seneca. Perhaps she will tell us something about them eventually. And she is very well known as a translator of the plays of Seneca and for plays by Euripides. Her translation of the Odyssey has been received as outstanding, and this in a field that's very crowded. I don't know how many translations of the Odyssey exist, but surely in their hundreds into English. We are going to talk tonight about a best-selling author who has never appeared in the New York Times best-selling list and perhaps never existed. Oscar Wilde, in a debate about whether Homer existed or not, said Homer, or another Greek by the same name. So we will start with this strange figure, and I will ask for your opinion on who Homer was, or who Homer were. Was he a woman? Were there poets throughout centuries that contributed to this figure that we like to call Homer, established more or less, I think, in the 8th century or 7th century BC. So, Emily, let's start with your vision as a classicist of who Homer was and what did he do.
Yes, it's a great question. In the scholarly world, it's usually presented as Homeric question, capital H, capital Q, because there are so many different books, articles, theories about that question that has been debated for at least the last 100 years of classical scholarship. I mean, I think they is the best pronoun for Homer. I mean, not least because even if there was an individual or two individuals who put these monumental poems together in the 8th or 7th century BCE, those individuals were drawing on centuries of oral tradition during the centuries when there was no writing in the Greek-speaking world. Yeah. So it's not in debate that whoever it was, whether that's singular or plural, who created the written poems, they were drawing on the inspirations, the formulae, the words, the characters, the poetic rhythms that had been developed by multiple different singers.
Now, it's extraordinary, as you say, if there were, as there probably were, centuries of writers, poets, singers that created these characters that act out in the Iliad and the Odyssey, there are centuries of poets, writers, and so on who have taken those figures further. Homer in the 8th century is a watershed, but Homer exists today, for instance, in the works of Madeline Miller. Why Circe? Among all the women characters, or all the characters, you chose Achilles first, now you went to the Odyssey, but why Circe?
Circe was the one I was angriest about.
Angriest with her or with Homer?
No, with Homer.
Oh, right.
And so I first really have a memory of encountering Circe when I was 13 and I was reading the Odyssey in 8th grade for English class. And it got to the Circe section. I was really excited about it because I had heard that there was this witch who turned men into pigs, which is a very unusual feature for female characters in the ancient world. And so I was excited, you know, here's this character that isn't going to be flat. She isn't going to be just, you know, the character who dies to motivate the hero. She's going to have her own thing. But then when you actually read the scene in Homer, she is incredibly flattened. You know, the first thing that happens is, yes, she turns Odysseus' men into pigs, but then Odysseus shows up and pulls a very phallic sword on her and forces her to her knees, and she has to sort of submit and be tamed. And I, at that moment, the 13-year-old in me wanted to hurl the book across the room. I didn't, because I was obsessed with books, and I would never have done that to my book. But that's how I felt. And I think Circe really has just hung around in my brain since that moment of sort of wanting to say, well, how would this look from Circe's perspective? And I think the Odyssey actually really invites that because the Circe episode is narrated by Odysseus himself. It's him telling the story to some other people. And so when you start to look at the episode from that perspective, you realize, okay, this is Odysseus spinning this, right? I came to this island, and there was this beautiful nymph there, and she was really scary, but then I tamed her, and then she threw herself at me, and she was super hot. And that's sort of, you know, how he basically describes her. And so you realize that all of that stuff that he's saying, every time he talks about how beautiful she is or how powerful she is, really what he's meaning to do is reflect on himself and make himself look better. And so I wanted to sort of extract that, strip away Odysseus's spin and consider how this episode might look from her perspective.
Emily, just to have an idea what Homer does with it, can you go to the section of Circe and
yes.
read it in your version?
I mean, because the thing is, there's quite a lot about Circe.
Well, just a few lines.
Can't do all of it. I want to take
while you're looking for it, I want to say that you, in your introduction, you say that Homer is very subtle, and that when we are thinking that it is a male eye that is seeing the action, a male voice that is describing the action, suddenly he shifts, and we barely notice it, as in the scene with Penelope when he returns. Mm-hmm. But do you do the same thing with Circe?
Do I, or does the text?
Well,
I mean,
you as a translator. We'll talk about the translator as author in a moment.
I don't know. I mean, I think I entirely agree with Madeline that there's a way that the poem sets you up to, I mean, you, even if you're not a 21st century feminist reader, but any reader or, of course, an antiquity listener, I think you're set up to expect in the Wandering Books of the Odyssey both Odysseus, what we know about him is that he's sneaky and always telling lies, and that he's clever, and that's how he survives. But also that this is a world where very powerful goddesses are going to be interesting characters. The whole action is engineered by the very powerful, mostly female but sometimes non-binary Athena, that we've already had, in a way, a parallel character of Calypso, and we hear a lot from Calypso. So I think in a way there's something disappointing about how we hear so much less from Circe than we do from Calypso, even though in some ways they're comparable in that they're both these immortal goddesses who have their own realm. There isn't male power, there's male disempowerment on their islands, and they have this quasi-magical quality, this quality of enchantment.
And curiously enough, it's Circe that is more memorable than Calypso.
Oh, I think they're both extremely.
Really?
I don't think
okay.
that. The Calypso is extremely memorable.
Yeah.
I remember her. I think she's great. I don't know. Yes. So should I read about the pigs, or should I read about the...
About the pig.
The pigs should be there. We want the pigs. Well, so should the men get transformed back into guys? They should, right? That's probably the better passage to read. Oh, no, I think the animals are good.
Just a short bit.
It's okay. It's difficult because the whole Circe episode is too long for a reading, and I don't usually read this part, so I should have checked beforehand. Okay. So Odysseus is forcing the men to go back to the palace of Circe, even though one of the men who's gone on a scouting expedition warns them that half the expedition party that went out there didn't come back. It's dangerous there. And he's begging and pleading Odysseus, who is the kind of leader who forces his men to go into these ultra-dangerous situations, as he did in the case of the Cyclops when several of them got eaten. So he's forcing them to do that again. And then they're all weeping and wailing and begging him not to do that. So at that, their hearts sank, since they all remembered what happened with the Laestrygonians, who ate huge numbers of them, at their king Antiphates, and how the mighty Cyclops devoured the men. They wept and wailed and shed great floods of tears. But all that grieving could do no good. I made them wear their armor and split them in 2 groups. I led one and made godlike Eurylochus lead the other. Those left behind with me were crying too. Inside the glade, they found the house of Circe, built out of polished stones on high foundations. Round it were mountain wolves and lions, which she tamed with drugs. They did not rush on them, but gathered round them in a friendly way, their long tails wagging, as dogs nuzzle round their master when he comes back home from dinner with treats for them. Just so those sharp-clawed wolves and lions, mighty beasts, came snuggling up. The men were terrified. They stood outside and heard some lovely singing. It was Circe, the goddess. She was weaving as she sang, an intricate, enchanting piece of work, the kind a goddess fashions. I'm going to stop there because I kind of want to leave it there. Circe is powerful and
Sure.
powerful both over the goddess,
Let's go to the
over
pigs.
the animals, and the... you want the pigs. Okay. You've got to have the pigs. All right. So Hermes is telling Odysseus what happened to his men. Why have you come across these hills alone? You do not know this place, poor man. Your men were turned to pigs in Circe's house and crammed in pens. Do you imagine you can set them free? You cannot. If you try that, you will not get back home. Okay, so then ... Odysseus gets to the house, but thanks to the help of Hermes and the magic potion, the magic moly, the plant, he manages to withstand the enchantment, and then this is the transformation back from pigs to men.
Maybe we'll stop there.
Sorry, that was too much. I'm sorry. I knew I was going to have to skip
It's,
lots of things.
It's
Yes.
not too much. It's Homer.
Yes, Homer. It's great. You can read forever.
But I want to ask Madeline to read the section about Circe and the pigs to see how you translated it in your own words, your own imagination for us.
Sure. So the he in the passage here is Odysseus. He asked me once, why pigs? We were seated before my hearth in our usual chairs. He liked the one draped in cowhide with silver inlaid in its carvings. Sometimes he would rub the scrolling absently beneath his thumb. Why not? I said. He gave me a bare smile. I mean it, I would like to know. I knew he meant it. He was not a pious man, but the seeking out of things hidden. This was his highest worship. There were answers in me. I felt them, buried deep as last year's bulbs, growing fat. Their roots tangled with those moments I had spent against the wall, when my lions were gone, and my spells shut up inside me. After I changed a crew, I would watch them scrabbling and crying in the sty, falling over each other, stupid with their horror. They hated it all, their newly voluptuous flesh, their delicate split trotters, their swollen bellies dragging in the earth's muck. It was a humiliation, a debasement. They were sick with longing for their hands, those appendages men use to mitigate the world. Come, I would say to them, it's not that bad. You should appreciate a pig's advantages. Mud slick and swift, they are hard to catch. Low to the ground, they cannot easily be knocked over. They are not like dogs. They do not need your love. They can thrive anywhere, on anything, scraps and trash. They look witless and dull, which lulls their enemies, but they are clever. They will remember your face. They never listened. The truth is, men make terrible pigs.
Your Circe is struggling to find her identity. She's born of two titans. She's in the world of gods and nymphs. She has relationships with men. She has a son. How did you build her character, and who is that mysterious son?
Well, thinking of Circe's journey very broadly, I was sort of drawing on some things from Homer. And one of the things from Homer is this description of Circe as the dread goddess who speaks like a human or speaks like a mortal. And it's kind of a mysterious description, and it really spoke to me because immediately it set Circe out as a character who's caught between worlds. She belongs to the world of the gods, but she has this piece of her that is sort of yearning for or somehow connected to the mortal world. And characters like that who are outsiders are really interesting. And particularly when you think about the gods, you know, what do you think about when you think about Zeus or Hermes? You think about the booming, the great voice of these. And so what would it mean to have a voice that couldn't equal that? You know, you would be an outsider, you would be an outcast. And so that was sort of where I started thinking. I was also interested in having her journey in some ways mirror Odysseus's journey. And so Odysseus, I mean, the whole Odyssey is animated by this longing for homecoming, for nostos, trying to get back home, and then sort of what happens once you get home. Is it really home? Is it still home? And Circe doesn't have sort of an easy Ithaca waiting for her. But she has to kind of go out in the world to find her home. She has to discover what that home might look like and then see if she can create it for herself. So that was another part of her story, this longing for home in her, but a home that is not actually the home she was born to. She's very alienated from her family, so she has to find it in a different place. I liked the fact that she was an artist. That was a really important part of her conception for me.
Well, Homer describes her as weaving.
Yes.
And, yeah.
Yes, well, not only the weaving, but also the witchcraft.
Yes.
Because witchcraft is really distinct from divine power. And it's a little mysterious, it's a little contradictory in the sources how witchcraft actually works in the ancient world. But it involves, the use of herbs and poisons and potions, and there's stuff you have to do and create and mix and make as well as say. And so it's totally different. It's a totally different type of power. And so I like that she had sort of this double craft. She's a weaver, but also she is this, she's a witch. And so that was interesting. And again, very different from what gods are like.
Yeah. And the sun?
Spoiler, but it is 3,000 years old, so. She has a son in some sources called Telegonus, a son with Odysseus. And in other sources, she has more than one son, but I went with the one son. And I was very interested in Circe's experience as a mother. I think a lot of times in epic literature, women are really sidelined. And the focus in epic literature is on the world of men and things that are traditionally male. So warfare and patrimony and vengeance and adventuring and monsters and all of that. And experiences like, there's not a lot of diaper changing in the Odyssey. And I sort of wanted to, as part of putting Circe at the center of the story, I wanted to bring in aspects of her experience as a woman that would have been considered not important enough for epic literature. So, what it's like for her as a single mother on this island, what it's like, who has a difficult child, and how she struggles just like many parents struggle. So that was an important piece. And also this idea of letting go of your child, that, your child is, I think that's one of the essential difficulties of parenthood, is that on one hand, your child is literally from your body, but they are also completely their own person. And sort of that duality of the total care you have to give them with the fact that also you must respect their personhood. And I think I wanted her to have to work through that.
Emily, do you agree with Madeline that epic sidelines women?
I think to some extent it does, yes. I mean, I think it matters that both the Odyssey and the Iliad present themselves as inspired by a goddess, and that in both poems, divine female power is absolutely essential to how does the plot work, how does action work. But it seems to me that both the Homeric poems, both the Iliad and the Odyssey, are interested in exploring what would it be like to know about other cultures where the world isn't as patriarchal, isn't structured in this way where to be female means to be relatively powerless. And in the mortal world, that is how it is. Even if there are differences between different mortal cultures that are encountered in the Odyssey, the poem is interested in exploring how can you be different within the mortal world, how is it different if you're a slave versus not a slave, but also how is it radically different if you live forever. If you live forever, there might be a possibility that both female and male people who live forever have this enormous autonomy, that you can be a goddess and have your own island. You can be a goddess and you can cause massacres, and you can have the glory that comes with causing a massacre. Whereas if you're a mortal woman, you're not going to get to go out on the battlefield in the way that Athena does. So I think it's important that these are poems which explore the possibility of huge amounts of female power, but of course not in the realm of the mortals, because to be a mortal female means that you're always going to be vulnerable to some man could enslave you and rape you, and that's what keeps happening to mortal females.
Your reading of Homer, does it affect your translation? That is to say, do you feel that in translating Homer, you are giving your opinion about Homer?
I think every translator of every text, whether it's Homer or anything else, I mean, even if it's a contemporary novel, it's not the same as machine translation. And then even Google Translate, it has whatever the algorithms had built into it by humans. I think that a translator is always going to have a series of possible things you could do with every single syllable, let alone every passage, every line. The choices you make about what am I going to do with that line, that syllable, that rhythm, that sound, that character, that voice, those are always going to be inflected by how do I see this text. And it seems to me that it's important to be as conscious as possible about why am I making the choices I'm making? Why am I thinking of Penelope this way? What kind of voice do I want her character to have? What kind of voice do I think is justifiable that's going to make sense of the whole text as well as of this line? I felt that in the course, I mean, I'm a literary critic as well as a translator, obviously a teacher of the Odyssey in college as well as a translator of it. I was conscious that I had particular interpretative interests in the poem going into the project of translation, and I knew that on some level my desire to produce critical commentary is different from my desire to translate. That I got to write the introduction, and the kind of writing that I could do in writing the introduction was sort of telling you, this is what I think are important themes. That's a different kind of voice from, and this is how I think this character sounds, or this line sounds. But in both cases, there's me there. I'm trying to write in different voices, but I'm also, that's me doing the writing. And that's the case for every translator, not just for me.
That's why Borges said that a translation is another draft of the original text.
Exactly, yes.
Now, you make specific choices. I will ask you to read just the first lines of the beginning of the Odyssey, and I will ask you a specific question regarding those lines.
Sure. I actually did a slight change in the paperback, so this is the hardback version. Tell me about a complicated man. Muse, tell me how he wandered and was lost when he had wrecked the holy town of Troy, and where he went and who he met, the pain he suffered in the storms at sea, and how he worked to save his life and bring his men back home. He failed to keep them safe. Poor fools, they ate the sun god's cattle, and the god kept them from home. Now, goddess, child of Zeus, tell the old story for our modern times. Find the beginning.
Read the first line once more, and I will ask you a question about one word in that line.
That's what everyone always asks me. Tell me about a complicated man.
Yes. I have here 5 classic translations of the Odyssey. I will read them in order. Fagles, he translates "you're complicated" as "man of twists and turns." Fitzgerald, skilled in all ways of contending. Butler, who thought that the Odyssey was written by a woman, so ready at need. Pope, the man for wisdom's various arts renowned. And Chapman, Keats's Chapman, wound with his wisdom to his wished stay. All that in complicated. Do you think that we improve on Homer in different translations? Do you think that the translator enriches the original? I think you do that with complicated. I don't know the Greek. I have not a word of Greek. It's Greek to me. So what is the word in Greek?
Polytropos, or polytropon, because it's in the accusative case.
And the literal translation is complicated.
Well, literal translation, what does that mean?
Well,
yes. So polu, the prefix poly, from which we get polygamy, it implies multiplicity. So most of Odysseus' epithets start with that prefix polu, poly. He's repeatedly described as much. And he's also, unlike other Homeric characters, he has multiple different epithets, whereas Achilles, he's almost always swift-footed, and you don't ever sort of encounter, and now all of a sudden Achilles is going to be complicated. No, he's not. He's always swift-footed. He's always on this very, very quick path towards, whenever the quickest way to get to slaughter lots of people, direct, I'm going to always tell you the truth, I'm never going to be sneaky or to pretend to be someone else, and I'm on the quickest path to death. And I'm going to get there as fast as I possibly can, right? Whereas Odysseus is the opposite of that, right? He's always many, many, many things. Yeah. So this is a relatively unusual epithet of Odysseus. He's often described as polymetis, much cunning, much cleverness, polymekanos, much stratagemed. If I was translating that, I might think bound with his wisdom, maybe that has some sense to it. This one is polutropos, which is just much turny, much twisty, and I think it applies to the poem itself. I think it matters that that's the word that's used out of the many words that can be applied to Odysseus. He's turny right at the start of his journey, right at the start of a narrative which itself has its own strange and difficult and complicated ways of approaching the story, whereby we're looking from many different perspectives on this single journey about a single person's homecoming. It affects many different people. It's layered. It's told in a complicated way. He's layered. He's complicated. So I wanted to invite the reader to think about a word that implies not just this is a journey which takes a really long time, and he goes on all this meandering, but that also it could apply to both his interiority, maybe there are layers to his personality, but also there are layers to the journey, also there are layers to the story, also there are layers to the poem. There aren't that many ways you can do that where it's also, as the original, as a single word. I didn't want to do what many translators do of, there's one word in the Greek, let me take 3 lines to do that, because then you slow the story down. So one of the main things I wanted to do in the translation was echo some of the clarity of the Greek. That even though it is complicated, it's layered, it's dense, we have this real complexity in terms of human relationships and what is the story about. It's also fast-moving, and we can actually get a clear sense of this is what's happening here. Yeah. It's designed to be comprehensible to illiterate audiences when you're performing out loud.
I agree that it's an extraordinary word, and I think it's very effective. I like it very much. But I see that Madeline was nodding when you were talking about Achilles as being great, and your description of Odysseus. However, in your novels, it's exactly the contrary. The Odysseus in Circe is almost simple-minded. The Achilles in the Song of Achilles is hugely complicated.
Well, I wanted Achilles to be complicated in the sense that he has depth to him in the Song of Achilles, but I really loved that line in the Iliad, that Homer gives Achilles, where Achilles says, I hate like the gates of death the man who says one thing and hides another in his heart, which is, in many ways the definition of Odysseus. And I loved that straightforward aspect to Achilles, and it's actually something that his lover Patroclus values very much about him, is that he doesn't have to worry about all this hidden, what are my hidden motives, how am I manipulating you? Achilles just doesn't work that way. He is straight ahead, he is swift-footed to his purpose, and that there is, as I say in the novel, a sort of genius to that, and I think that that's true. With Odysseus, it was really fun to get to visit him because in both Circe and Song of Achilles, I'm writing from a first-person narrator. And I love working from a first-person narrator because then you can deal with all the complexities of perspective and what can this person see and what can they not see and how does their perspective change. And so I wanted, Patroclus sees Odysseus very differently from the way Circe sees him. Odysseus in the Song of Achilles is mostly an antagonist. And in Circe, he's much more of it's almost like he and Circe are both kind of shipwrecked in the same survivor moment of, they've lived through a lot of bad stuff and they kind of end up on the same shore together, and they're able to find a way to each other within that pain for what they've suffered. But I also wanted Odysseus, one of the things I like about Odysseus is I feel like he recedes from our understanding exactly because of that sort of complexity to him, that he just kind of turns out of our grasp every time we reach for him. And so I wanted Circe's perspective of him in that moment to be sort of layered with how Penelope talks about him later on in the novel, and how his son sees him later on in the novel, and how all those characters sort of, even if you put them all together, you sort of still don't get Odysseus. He still is kind of his complex, chameleon self. So I wanted Circe to be in some ways wrong about him the first time she meets him, and to come to sort of deeper understanding.
Once Circe allows Odysseus to leave, she says that before he leaves, he has to visit the underworld and speak to his father. How do you interpret that in terms of who Circe is? Why does she give him that instruction? not because she's following orders. There's something in her that wants to accomplish something. It's very effective in the novel, but you don't quite understand why she does it.
I mean, the famous journey to the underworld, you know, where he goes down, and he actually doesn't go into it, he sort of summons the spirits out of it using a pool of blood. He has to speak to this. It's a very strange episode because it serves a really important psychological purpose. He has to talk to his mother, he has to find out. So he's been away for all these years, and he learns when he does this that his mother has died. And he also sort of revisits and retouches a lot of the characters from the Iliad. He sees Achilles there, for instance, and he sees Agamemnon still complaining. And, you know, so there's a lot of, I feel like in some sense, if we are looking at Odysseus's journey, and this is one of the things that I think is still so gripping about the Odyssey as a veteran's journey. We are dealing with him having to go back and confront the death of his comrades and the deaths he has caused himself and the lives that he has missed out on by being away. And I feel like that is something that veterans have struggled with, you know, down through the centuries. And the ancients really understood about war. You know, they didn't have the word PTSD, but I think it's very clear in the Ajax tragedy and Philoctetes and many other works, even I would say in the end of the Odyssey itself, that they understood that it can be very difficult to have been away at war and then to come back home. And so I think for me that Circe is, you know, yes, she has this sort of frightening part to her, but she's also a healer, and she's represented as a healer in the Odyssey. And that in a sense, I don't know if there's sort of some kind of thematic healing that's happening there or an attempt to force him to reckon with things in his past.
That is very convincing. I feel that explains, no, really, explains an ambiguity that I felt in that action of Circe in your novel. But also, if Odysseus, in Emily's view, is complicated, your Circe is extraordinarily complicated. And at the end, when she has to face her role, her many roles, but especially her role as a mother, as healer, as the person who wants to be independent from that past that is imposed on her. Will you read us the end of the novel?
Sure. Spoilers. Where do you want? How much of it?
Just the last 2 paragraphs, I think
okay.
it is. I don't have that.
Sure. Yeah, I don't know. Is this terrible? Okay, they don't want me to do it. All right, instead, I'm going to talk about the ending in a vague way. How about that? Because I don't want to ruin it. Because actually, the ending is one of the places where I most diverge from the mythology. So one of the myths that we have about Circe is, and I don't do this in the novel, is that at some point, Telegonus, her son with Odysseus, grows up and he goes off to look for his father, and some stuff happens. Odysseus ends up dying, and Telegonus brings Penelope and Telemachus. Telemachus is Penelope's son with Odysseus, back to the island of Aiaia. And the 4 of them are on the island of Aiaia. And so that was very exciting, knowing that Penelope was waiting for me in the last quarter of the novel. But then what happens is that Circe marries Telemachus, Penelope marries Telegonus, so like son swap, and then Circe makes them all gods. And I knew from the very beginning I was not doing that version. And I knew I was not doing that version for a lot of different reasons. One, I think the obsession in the Odyssey is with what man Penelope is attached to. And I really wanted her story to end with something that was not about her being attached to a man. I also never saw my Telegonus as straight. I, on top of that, saw that I really wanted Circe. I felt that my Circe was moving away from divinity. That in her world, in my imagination of the gods, talking about having no consequences, as Emily talked about. You know, what happens to human beings when we have no consequences? What happens when we are completely insulated from any sort of repercussions for our bad behavior? You become sociopathic narcissists. So that's who the gods are. That's Circe's family. And so she's moving away from that and towards mortality, as opposed to bringing more people into this world of no consequences. So I pushed back against that and really kind of moved it all around. So that's why I don't want to read the ending.
All right.
Sorry.
Then we will skip that reading, but Emily, I will go to this idea of consequences. In your introduction, you point out very clearly the relationship of Odysseus with his men. He calls them brothers, he calls them friends, but they're really his servants, they're under him. And so he imposes things on them that have terrible consequences. Do you think that that subtlety, irony is deliberate? It is deliberate in your translation.
Yes, I mean, we were talking earlier about what are the many different minds and brains that contributed to the development of this story, this poem. Who meant what? I mean, if we have multiple different creators, it's hard. I mean, it's always hard to talk about what did the poet intend. Does the poet always know what she intends?
Yes.
It can be that the text is saying something and meaning some things that the poet doesn't necessarily consciously know, and that's even more difficult if there are multiple poets.
Of course.
I think it's clear in the text that the poem is very much engaged with and interested in gaps of power and how do we forge a society where there's these radically unequal gaps of power, not just between Odysseus and his hetairoi, his quote-unquote companions, who, as you say, have to be subordinate both in terms of they're the ones doing all the rowing, but they're not going to get a journey home. They're all going to be dead. So that it seems to me that it's very explicitly thematized that they think they're getting a raw deal, that we have the speech of Eurylochus saying, this is actually not fair. This guy is getting all these gifts. Everywhere we go, people give him presents. Where are our presents? No presents. And also, we get no glory. There's only one of them that even gets a name. In terms of the narrative, they get no song that's told generations and generations after them. So this desire to be a protagonist, to be a hero, to be the subject of heroic song, they don't get that. Instead, they get dead. So the same thing also in terms of the contrast between the power of Odysseus in his marriage and in his household and his wife's power is a very different perspective on what does marriage mean, what does the household mean, depending on whether you're in the single position where you get to be in control versus all the various other positions where your role is to enable his power and his glory.
Is this search for control what underlines the terrible violence of both poems?
I think it's partly about control. It's also about glory. It's also about creating a wonderful story. And there's this whole question, which I think the Homeric poems are very conscious of are we always going to be complicit? We want to hear violent, gory stories. I mean, I think most of us actually do. We kind of like it. And we like hearing about people wrestling with each other for power. I mean, certainly both the Iliad and the Odyssey are about this question of if you have a warrior society where the most powerful men are extremely powerful, then what happens to everyone else who isn't that individualistic, powerful guy who wants everyone else to obey him or else be killed? What happens to the other people? Regarding that, I will just tell you a very brief anecdote that shows up to what point these poems resonate. The library system in Colombia is very effective and sends librarians into the Sierra to distant outposts with donkeys. Donkeys carry baskets of books, and they go to the communities and leave the books there. They're called biblioburros. So a librarian that did that told me this story. The books that they send are mainly handicraft manuals and cooking books and so on. But they send some poetry, and they send a translation of Homer. And the books always come back, but that time, the people in the village kept the Homer.
And the librarian went back and said, okay, you can keep that book, but why that specific book? And the elder of the village told her, we read the story out loud, and it's our story. We live in a climate of war with gods that are crazy, that are whimsical. We don't know what armies will attack us. This is our story.
It's beautiful, yes. Yeah. It's so many people's story, isn't it?
Oh,
I mean,
absolutely.
even if it's not actually a war zone where you live, in almost all of us are aware of violence in our cities and aware of what does it mean to have broken homes and different cultures that clash with each other. What does it mean to have imbalances of power that might be partly to do with gender, partly to do with class. All these things are still with us, and veteran experience.
And as Madeline was saying, it's also a quest for identity.
Yeah.
And trying to find a home in this climate of migration and having to leave your home and the home no longer exists, and finding your identity like your Circe.
Yeah.
Maybe it's time to open up for questions now. I think you have microphone. Are there microphones there? Yes, I can't see anything because we have this blinding light.
Yeah. We're on Olympus.
So, yes, maybe your first question.
Okay, I will try to set this up as briefly as possible. So when I approach the Odyssey, I think of the main players to be Calypso, Circe, Penelope. So I agree, Calypso and Circe, both equally fascinating to me. And Calypso, of course, by the nature of her name, it does a lot of hiding away. And so despite offering immortality, she doesn't offer him a legacy. And so it's kind of clear how he wants to move away from that. Circe, on the other hand, she's full of secrets and she gives them to him. Like, so this draw of knowledge for him.
Please, the question.
Yes, yes. Whereas Penelope, I think, tends to be almost like the Lady Odysseus with, you know, like you were saying, Odysseus.
The question, please, because there are very many people trying to ask one.
I guess what I want to ask with those three characters, what, from either of your perspectives, what is their objective? Like thinking Calypso, Circe, Penelope, what do they want?
Perhaps Madeline first, what is their objective?
Well, I think Circe's objective is sort of like the entire novel. So I think, because I didn't want to have it just be one thing, because I think that's true for all of us, that we don't just have one thing that we want or that we're aiming for, that there are many things and sometimes they're at cross purposes. And so I wanted to tease all that out. So I guess I'll talk about, I don't really cover Calypso, but I guess I'll talk about Penelope then. I love the fact that I feel like Homer in some ways teases us with kind of the closest thing you can imagine to a mutual relationship in the ancient world, but still making it extremely clear that Penelope is very much subordinate to Odysseus. And there's just this one part that I really appreciate about Penelope, speaking of someone who says one thing and hides another in their heart, is that in the Odyssey, Odysseus is sort of still in disguise and he's watching Penelope talk to the suitors, and Penelope has decided to say to the suitors, fine, I'll pick one of you, but you have to start giving me a lot more stuff. And you know, you would imagine that a husband watching this might feel jealous, but Odysseus laughs. Because he says he knows exactly what she's doing. He knows that she's, you know, getting more money and gold and prestige out of them, and he knows that she's manipulating them. And I loved that meeting of the minds, that he respects that about her, and he sees that. So I wanted her also to want many different things. She wants safety. She wants some independence. She wants to rebuild her relationship with her son. She wants to, you know, I think there are so many, many different things.
Yes, this is the kind of question which clearly one could talk for half an hour very happily about, so I don't want to do that. I mean, I agree with you that Penelope, maybe in some ways even more than Odysseus, is complicated, and that what we get in the Odyssey is, in terms of access to her interiority, we get these amazing accounts of her dreams, that she's constantly saying, I had a dream. She tells the dream of dreaming that she was surrounded by geese, and then an eagle swooped in and killed all her geese. And then the eagle pops up and says, I used to be an eagle. Surprise, I'm Odysseus. I'm your husband. Yes, I'm going to come back and kill them all. And in the dream, she's crying. And then in real life, Odysseus in disguise says, mansplaining away, this is fine. It means he's going to come back. And he doesn't explain her tears. And I think the poem is interested in how she has these different things pulling her in different directions. She wants to keep her home. She loves her home. She loves the bed, even though it's marked by tears, grief, abandonment. But she also wants more stuff. She wants more glory. Maybe she wants a younger husband. Who knows? I mean, she wants to take care of her son, and she doesn't know how to do that. I think in Calypso's case, maybe there's, insofar as we get access to what does she wants recognition for what she's done. She's done an important piece of work in saving somebody. She's done this thing of saving somebody's life. If she was a male god having an affair, they would let him survive and stay with her until she got bored of him, right? And in this case, she's not yet bored, and yet they're taking him away. So it's kind of annoying. So she gives that wonderful speech complaining about how there's this terrible double standard on Olympus, where even if you're an immortal goddess, you still get the people you're having an affair with, they get blasted by lightning before you're done with them, which is kind of annoying.
Maybe a question there so that we balance them out.
Hi, I was just wondering what each of you think that even though the story is thousands of years old, it's still relevant and kind of relatable to modern audiences, even though they didn't have modern technology. It was written at a time of a very patriarchal society.
I think we're still in quite a patriarchal society, is one thing. But I also think, they didn't have the internet, but to what extent are we defined as human beings by the internet? I actually don't think we are particularly. I think we're just still learning what does it mean to be an internet human as opposed to a regular human. The Odyssey is about these absolutely universal questions that are to do with what is it to be a person over time. If you come back to your home 20 years later, are you still the same person, even if the home has changed? Are you the same person in a different environment? Are we all actually, like Odysseus, always telling different lies, different personae, depending on who we're with? I think that's actually a universal human question of, are you the same, are you different? Are other people the same as me or different? The whole question of what is a family, what is a community, who's in and who's out? The question of if somebody comes to your house from somewhere else, what do you do? When do you welcome them in, and when do you slaughter them? And that actually is up to, I think it's also a particular question for us now with migration and globalization. I stopped there, yes, sorry.
They are telling me we have 1 more minute. So, Madeline, could you just give your opinion, and then we will have to close this. I'm sorry.
So, well, people often say, what did you have to do to make Circe relevant, to make these myths relevant? Absolutely nothing. Did you do nothing? I feel like it's all right there. And sometimes you have to sort of stretch your perspective a little bit, but I feel like we are still the same people. We are still struggling with the same questions. We are still looking at power dynamics and, as you say, gaps in power, at who is oppressing and who is being oppressed. We're still have a long way to go in terms of how we treat women in society. So all these things are all right there. One of the things I loved about your translation is you have, I think it's is it the Pirate and the Shepherd? Is that the
book
Cyclops
9,
chapter?
Yeah.
Which I feel like, the Cyclops is just there. He has his cave. Odysseus shows up. They decide to hang out in the cave. So again, this idea of if you just slightly change the perspective, so in that, the pirate and the shepherd, that's Odysseus the pirate and the Cyclops the shepherd. And I feel like, you start to realize that all these dynamics of, who is entitled to take from someone else. I mean, these are all still very with us.
Thank you very much. Madeline Miller, Circe, Emily Wilson, Homer.
Thank you so much.